the overall topic, or the overall series, is called The Complexity of Ethics. And what it basically is, the underlying theme is that making ethical decisions, which includes halakhic decisions, but it's broader in terms of ethical concepts and ideas, is actually a very complex process. And that the Torah basically advocates for its recognition of complexity. And that's basically the underlying theory here. And what we try to do with the examples and sources and stuff like that is try to deal with this approach to understanding Torah with a perception of its recognition of the complexity of ethical decision making and the complexity of what basically are Torah decision making or Jewish decision making. What this basically deals with is the fact that most people who believe in revelation, and you think about this in terms of fundamentalist Christians or whatever, or you can think about this in terms of ISIS, you know, which is like fundamentalist radical Muslims. Most people have an impression that
this doesn't usually happen.
No.
Okay. We don't
Okay.
normally have this many people.
Okay. Well, anyways, okay. So, I'm trying to figure if we should start all over again. You know? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Listen, we're going to start all over again. Okay. Okay. The idea is we're dealing with the complexity of ethics. The fact is that it is my strong belief from a Torah perspective that we have to be decision makers in a complex realm of how to make decisions. That's the realm of this world and the realm of Torah. And it calls upon us to take a very active role in that decision making when the decision making is also extremely difficult. It's not easy. The fact is that revelation, the way most people understand revelation is a presentation of God of the answers. Okay? So if you take in terms of fundamentalist Christianity, or you take in terms of ISIS, which is really just radicalized fundamentalist Islam, there's a perception that God gives you the right answer. And the answer is black and white. And since the answer is black and white, right, if you're on this side, you're a good guy, and if on that side, you're a bad guy, and if you're a bad guy, then you deserve to be, anything happen to you because you're necessarily bad because you're on the bad side. So the fact is it all comes down to, it's a very simple perception. This is right and this is wrong, and it's simple, and you know this because God said this is right and this is wrong. And that's the answer of revelation. The fact is, though, is that from a Torah perspective, the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai was not so clear. And what we mean by that is that if you look, God did not give over very straightforward statements of right and wrong. He gave over a whole analysis and demands your investigation of analysis. So we looked at the share of a statement of Moshe Feinstein in his Hagdama Tigris Moshe. Okay, and Moshe was what? Hagdama Tigris Moshe.
No, what is it? Hagdama.
Introduction to Tigris Moshe. Okay, the fact is Moshe Feinstein, who was the major posek of the late 20th century for sure, okay, and still has remarkable influence in halakha today. He passed away in 1986. The fact is, if you read his opening statements in his introduction, he deals with that problem. He says, why didn't God just give over straightforward statements of right and wrong? Basically, he gave over this analysis, this statements, and then we have to analyze and use our mind to try and figure out what's right and wrong. And the fact is, that's the whole halakhic process. Statements were not given over clear-cut. Statements were given over of ideas, and then there had to be questions and analysis and investigation, and then there had to be this further idea of back and forth, and therefore it ended up with disagreements, and people saying this, people saying that, because of the reality that it wasn't so clear-cut. So the fact is behind the shear is the idea of what exactly is this revelation, and what is the Kadosh Baruch Hu's idea with this revelation. His revelation was not to give the answers. That seems to be clear-cut. His revelation was to give some other system for us to try and work out the answers. And throughout example after example, you have cases where it is necessary for us to call upon to question and to think. And you take this in terms of comparison to, let's say, fundamentalists. If you speak to Rabbi Michael Skobach, who is one of the leading anti-missionaries in the world, and the educational director of Jews for Judaism here in Toronto, he'll tell you about his experience in arguing with fundamentalists. And they'll always end their conversation when Rabbi Skobach presents a question, an analysis, they'll sit there and say, I'll go home and pray about it. They won't say, I'll go home and think about it. They'll say, generally they'll say, I'll go home and pray about it. Because the fact is that they're really concerned about the human involvement, right? We want an answer from God, pray about it, and so forth and so forth. We say, go home and think about it. Because the fact is our perception of revelation is that Kadosh Baruch Hu never intended to get us to stop thinking. And that really is indicated by the necessity of questioning. That we have to question. In order to understand the revelation, what Rabbi Skobach does, here's a question, they say we have to go and think about it, because they want their answers to be black and white. So they read their text fundamentally. What does that mean in terms of fundamentalism? It's black and white what is said. 6 days means 6 days. When we say, in terms of creation story, what we say is, to really understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying in the Torah Shebechtav, we have to know how to ask the questions in Torah Shebechtav. And if we don't ask the right questions, we're not going to get the message. And that's where Torah Sheba'al Peh becomes so significant. The oral law basically tells us you have to question. And it's for you to really understand what's being said here, you're not going to get what the Torah is really saying. There was this idea of thought unless you ask a question. Classic first example of that, I forget who says it, I think it's basically, the classic first example of this is by the Akedah, by the binding of Yitzchak, where God says to Avram, go and offer Yitzchak as a sacrifice. So Avram goes and thinks he's going to kill his son. He has to sacrifice his son and killing him. And Avram has a question. What the Medrash said, he had a real problem. He had a question in his mind. He didn't ask it before the event. He asked this after. The first thing that happens when he was told, you don't have to do this anymore, he says, I don't get it. You told me that my progeny will come from Yitzchak. Yitzchak yigre lecha zara. My progeny will come from Yitzchak. Yitzchak doesn't have any children. And then you tell me to kill him. How could you tell me to kill him and tell me and also have told me that the progeny is coming to him? So the Medrash says, Kodesh Baruch Hu answers, says, I never told you to kill him. I said, Ha'oleu sham la'olah. I told you to place him on the Mizbeach. Never said to go through with a sacrifice, just put him on the Mizbeach. That's what I say. So I forget who says it, but the person says, and this is the source of halachic reasoning. To really understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of us, you have to ask questions. It's necessary for you to ask questions, and it's necessary to use your own being and your own thought to ask those questions. Okay, and that brings out an aspect of seeing the complexity of the situation, not just reading the simplicity, but actually seeing the complexity, asking the questions, and then working out the answers. And when you work out the answers, you need as much information as possible. So therefore, the reason not every individual can just give any answer, although every individual has to contemplate the possibilities and so forth, but the fact is because people with a greater amount of information can give more complete answers. Okay? So that's basically what we're trying to do in the shir. and to build up this concept and to actually talk. So the fact is, the general underlying idea of recognizing the complexity, dealing with who God is from this perspective, and so forth, and then the further idea of actually using examples of this in ethical decision making. And that's really where you get into the complexity of ethics, because when you really see ethics, you see things are not black and white. You see things are actually very complex, and usually with every decision that has to be made, there's usually a positive result and a negative result. And usually what happens with a lot of ethical decision making is that you usually end up that the halacha says to do this, there's going to be some negative consequence possibly, but the positive consequence overrides the negative consequence. Okay? And you have classic examples of this. Okay? Classic example, anyone give an example where there's an ethical behavior that obviously also had a negative consequence that shows the complexity? Examples?
Positive behavior, killing a Malay.
Killing a man is an ethical issue. That's where you ask questions. How do you know this? How do you know the person really is a Russia? There's free will and so forth and so forth. That's a complex situation. But I'm thinking about. The fact is that you're thinking of situations which are ethically problematic, like the Agunas situation, right? The Agunas situation, a woman who cannot remarry. The fact is that you understand that this is not 100% perfectly beautiful, but the fact is that there's an ethical reason for this, but there's also a negative consequence which bothers us ethically. That's why there's dilemmas. But I'm thinking historically. You think of historical cases that we're told about where someone did something was clearly correct, was mandated, and yet there was also a negative consequence. In terms of?
With Tamar?
Tamar's a little bit, I was thinking just David and Melech having to go to war. He had to go to war. There was no doubt David and Melech did what was demanded of him to go to war. He had the negative consequence, so he couldn't build the base of Mikdash. He didn't do anything wrong. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. But there was a negative result. He couldn't build the base of Mikdash. Right? Okay. There's other cases. Example. Esther. How does Esther save the Jewish people?
She marries
Gentile. Well, she was forced to marry him, but she initiates contact with her husband. Right? She goes into Achashverosh. Right?
Oh, sure.
Right. No, but Achashverosh goes. The fact is that Mordechai says to Esther, "Go to Achashverosh and save the Jewish people," and Esther was not just going to have tea with her husband.
But is that whole Gemara about she was passive? Is that
the Gemara talks about how there's a whole halachic issue, and that is raised as an issue because she wasn't passive. It's not so simple, but she initiated that contact. So the fact is that when we read the Megillah, when she says "Kasher avadati avadati," what I will lose, it's read in the tone of Eicha. Because one of the consequences of Esther going in to save the Jewish people was that she was no longer able to stay married to Mordechai. Because there's a midrashic idea that she was originally Mordechai's wife.
Yeah. Wow.
And the Haggadah says that Esther was Mordechai's wife, and that when she was taken by Achashverosh, every situation was against her will. At this time, she initiated contact, which created the situation that a wife who initiates contact with another man, she becomes forbidden to her husband. So the truth is, at this point in time, Esther becomes forbidden to her husband, and even so, even though her intent was totally correct and she did the right thing and so forth, there was a sad consequence. And that's why, if you hear the Megillah reading, when that verse is read, "Kasher avadati avadati," what I will lose, it's to the tone of Eicha because there was a negative consequence to Esther. Okay, Yaakov Avinu, when he steals the Bechor, when he plays the trick to get the Bechor, right? Esav's upset. The fact that Esav's upset is something that was deemed to be that the Jewish people had to pay for that. They were persecuted by Esav because of Yaakov's thing, even though Yaakov did what he had to do. The fact is ethics are very complex. Ethics situations are not black and white. They're not simplistic, and making ethical decisions are not simple. They're tough decisions.
Very pedantic.
I feel like
not necessarily.
I didn't know that about Esther and Mordechai.
Yeah.
I didn't know that really she was Mordechai's.
That's according to the Haggadah. It's not the only pshat in the Gemara, but there's
But just looking on the surface, I mean, when can you just say like, or she had to marry a non-Jew?
Yeah,
In order to please
the
the
fact
people?
is it's a further problem. Why would it be that she had to go through that process of marrying a non-Jew? That's a further problem with the situation. Yeah, and the fact is that there is a person who says that Mordechai sent Esther in and so forth and so forth. There are people who basically, when Mordechai sends Esther in, there are people basically challenge him and said, why do you think it had to be this way? That the fact is, there's a Rebbe of mine who once explained at the end of the Megillah, it says over there that Mordechai was accepted by most of his brethren. So he said because some of his brethren felt it was wrong for him to send in Esther to save the Jewish people. He should have figured out another way. The fact is that nothing is black and white. Everything is pretty good. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do. So we are trying to look at specific ethical discussions, and that we are open to questions and discussion that comes up as it comes up. And the other thing we're trying to do is investigate how this complexity works. So this is an article that's a presentation and a translation by Rabbi Micha Bruder on the introduction to the Shari Yosher of Rabbi Shimon Shkop. Rabbi Shimon Shkop was a major Rosh Hashiva, a major individual, major gadol in pre-World War II Europe, in Lithuania. He was a major player, and he wrote a sefer called the Shari Yosher, which is a book of halachic principles. Okay, it's more on conceptual stuff and halachic precision making. In it, he wrote a Hakdama, and this Hakdama deals with a very specific ethical issue. And what I found about it is that it shows an example of how we look at ethical issues in a little bit of a complex manner. So that's what we're looking at tonight. Okay, and we're going to start this idea. Okay, so if you want to pass this around, and here, I'm going to keep one for myself. Okay.
You don't know this by heart?
No. As much as I don't know by heart. Anyway, but are there any questions about this? I mean,
anything, any ethical questions or any ethical?
Any issues?
That was just the intro. Let's get into the meat and potatoes, I guess.
The best thing about this year is when we kind of go on tangent and we talk about all the ethical problems that we have, that we find in the Jewish community, or whatever issues we have and want to relate to a halachic perspective, and we have a lot of fun with that. And again, this year is very blunt. It's not whitewashed. You can be as open as you want. Use whatever terminology you want.
Thank you. But okay, any questions when I say right now? Everything is clear cut. Okay, good. So we're gonna look at Rabbi Shimon Shkop. Okay. So I'm what?
What?
There's a picture of you on the wall.
What about the center?
Kind of like that. That's kind of a good point, I guess. Oh my God.
Interesting. Okay.
Is that Rabbi Shkop?
Okay. No. Okay. So let's Okay, so let's just go into this. Okay, so Shimon Shkop is going to say the following. There's a translation that goes along over here. So you can just follow the translation as I just read the Hebrew because I just feel I should read the Hebrew. But basically, he's opening up the Baruch HaBorei B'Zali Yosef Shebaranu B'Tzalmo D'No Staditu. We are created in God's image. V'chaya Olam Nata B'Dochenu She'adir Chafseinu. Okay, Lahetiv Am Zulato. He basically says, what does it mean to be created in God's image? It means that we have a great desire to benefit others. Okay, from a Jewish perspective, God is referred to as a Tov V'Hametiv, the good and the giver of good. Okay, the perception is, or basic in Jewish thought, is God does not need anything. So if God does not need anything, why did He create the world? The world was not necessary to fulfill a lack in Him. What the world did, though, is allow God to give good to others. Now, if you have a desire to give to others, then the inability to give to others may be a lack in you, so that's a further philosophical issue in terms of God's issue of wanting to give good and so forth. But the fact is that the fact of God as a creator is a major philosophical issue if you argue that God has no needs. So why did God create? The classic answer is God created to benefit the creation, i.e. He wished to benefit others. Okay? So He basically created human beings as the object of receiving His benefit.
Did He have to make so many?
That actually is a there's an interesting question to that, in the sense that what exactly does that mean? In other words, because there's you see, once you present these type of things, and this is what I mean by complexity and so forth. God created human beings. Okay, so the argument is, so if God wanted to benefit man, why not just create a good world? For example, why not put God into Olam Haba right away? Right? And therefore, here it is, I'm giving you a benefit. And the answer is, why did God not put human beings directly into Olam Haba?
Because Adam's sin.
What? No.
It's not the best for us.
No.
Free will.
What?
Free will. No,
and why is free will necessary?
Because it's like, isn't the whole point of it like a shachar pratis? The whole idea that we're here is for our own benefit. That the best thing that happens to us, you'll realize
that Olam Haba. It was still.
No, the fact is that wasn't. The fact is wasn't Olam. In other words, why did God? If I'm telling you that, if I'm saying you God's whole purpose in being of creating this world, God's whole purpose in creating this world was to benefit human beings, whether benefit other, right? So why not just put him in the perfect world of benefit? Olam Haba is the perfect world of benefit, right? There's no negative consequence in Olam Haba if you're in Gan Eden, right? So why not?
Whoa, I just thought of a crazy question. Why, if this is the perfect world for us, and the challenges in life that we face are the perfect world for us, then what's Olam Haba?
Olam Haba is a world of total benefit. This world is the perfect world for what our purpose is now. But our world, as we have it right now, is not a world of perfect pleasure. If I'm saying that God basically wanted to give pleasure to someone else, Tova Meitiv, He wanted to give good to someone else. So if He wanted to give good to someone else, why not just put him right into heaven right away? Because heaven is totally good, right? So why is it that He created this world first? So the classical answer is that because of Namaksufa, because the fact is that the ultimate way of getting benefit is when you earn it. Getting something for nothing does not give you the ultimate benefit. So the idea is God wanted to give over the perfect benefit, the highest form of benefit, and the highest form of benefit arises when a person has a chance of earning that benefit. Okay? Now, therefore He put us in this world, and this is the world where we earn what we have in Olam Haba. So that when we go to Olam Haba, it's not, we actually have the right to say to God, I did this, pay up. And there's classic examples of that, where we have a tzaddik basically saying to God, like for example, the classic example is by Hannah, the mother of Shmuel. Right? She basically goes up to God and says, listen, I want a kid, and if you're not going to do it this way, I'm going to do this, this, and this, right? And I'm going to get my husband to tell me not to be alone with him, and we go through the whole case of Sota, and then I wouldn't have done anything, and eventually you promise the person who's accused of being a Sota, and basically ends up not being found guilty, is going to be promised a kid, because I'm going to get it that way. But the fact is what Hannah is really doing is saying, what you've done is created necessity. In other words, and that's really what comes out with Olam Haba. It's not God's grace that gives you Olam Haba. Okay, it's not that God's doing you a favor giving you Olam Haba. The fact is that the idea in Judaism, the idea of Torah is that you earn it, and at the end you sit there and say, God, I did this, pay up. Right, so that gives you. So that seems to be the highest form of benefit God can give to you, that you earn Olam Haba.
So wait, so what she did was fine, or what she did
no,
was
there's
fine?
other problems with that. There's a whole bunch of problems with it, and that's a big
sleeping with the man.
You know what? She didn't sleep. No.
Fake sleeping. I said not actually.
It's a big problem. There's a lot of questions on that, and the whole Gemara. And the fact of the matter is the whole issue of whether the woman, the source, is actually promised the kid or so forth. It's not so simple. The fact is maybe it wasn't such a great example. But the point is that from our perspective, you earn Olam Haba, which means that you have that if you do a mitzvah, you basically earn it. It's like God has to pay you because it's yours. Okay. So the point is that when a person earns something and it's theirs, then that's the greatest pleasure. Okay. And that we have this concept throughout halakhic consciousness.
Pleasure is just dopamine.
What?
Pleasure is just dopamine. God could have put us in.
What we mean by that's the word pleasure is not the right word.
Right.
Whatever it is, the highest benefit that God can give us is for us to have a status where we earn it.
Right.
Okay? Now,
definitely not dopamine.
The point is that's the whole point of Olam Hazeh, of this world, in order to earn Olam Haba, which is the highest form of pleasure. Now, there's a classic problem with that idea. Classic problem with that idea is that, okay, it works well when I earn Olam Haba. Okay, what happens if the person is given the choice of free will and he botches up? He doesn't do good things, he does bad things. What's the consequence of that? What?
It's not an if, that's a when.
Well, the point is that person is going to sit there and say, listen, on second thought, I wish you would have given to me for free, and I wouldn't have to earn for it, right? So these are the kind of questions that you'll find in Sforim that deal with this. Okay, and that gets into the issue where is God's intent in terms of all humanity, or is God's intent just to have one person who earns Olam Haba? Okay, and then there's other issues of dealing with the negative consequences of it. It gets into, as you can imagine, very strong difficulties and difficult issues in terms of saying that, you know, that with free will there's a negative consequences. God wants us, you know, what about the result of this negative consequences? Would people choose it or not? I'll tell you one interesting thought about this. It's a Pnei Yoshua on Kabbalat Torah, which shows you. This is just an example of how these issues are not just thrown out as side issues by people as sort of like doing some curative work or something like that. It's that these are really deep, considered to be deep theological, philosophical, hashkafa issues in Torah thought and so forth and so forth. And the greatest minds in Torah dealt with them. And it really shows how much they thought through the complexity of Torah. Pnei Yeshua deals with an interesting question. It says, we all talk about Kabbalat Torah, the acceptance of Torah at Har Sinai, right? Now, what does that mean? What does it mean, the acceptance of Torah? What did the Jews do by accepting Torah? What do they say? What do they do?
They said, let our children do it.
Exactly.
Well,
so
they
accept. We're five.
They said
children as guarantors.
Yeah, they said yes, we'll keep it. But the fact is that there's an idea that the Jews had to accept the Torah. Now, what does that mean that Jews had to accept the Torah? When you think of God telling you something to do, how do you think that God's authority comes from in telling you something to do? Where does it come from?
God's authority to tell us to do something.
Yeah.
Himself.
What?
Fear of death.
And where does that come from? With fear of death? Because
Himself.
yeah, but
His
why,
own creation.
But why does he have this power of death over you? Because he's the
ultimate giver, the ultimate creator, the ultimate good, and then
he's also basically the king of this world.
Right.
And these are the rules of the world. So the fact is, there's a whole concept of that's part of the problem. The fact is that generally, when you think about God legislating law in Jewish thought, basically people approach him as him being king. And the king can legislate. It's his world. He sets the rules. He says, don't do this, do this. That's it. Now, if a king tells someone what to do, does the person have to accept it? You know?
Usually.
No. Right? No. King's there. King said, do it or you die. There's no accept. So why did the Jews have to accept it in Har Sinai? What is it? Acceptance makes it contractual. It's a contractual relationship. The fact is that this is no longer this. The point is what are you talking about? God is king, so He told you to do it.
People weren't that into Gan Eden because they'd rather do it than die. So
you're saying they'd rather
the afterlife apparently wasn't that appetizing for enough for them to say, we'll do this instead of die.
No. The fact of the matter is you forget about the mountain above them yet. They're talking about the fact God says, I want you guys to do this. What authority does God have to do this? Because He's God. He's King of the world. Okay? And why is it that He has to, I think it's Pnei Yeshua and Shabbos, on the Gemara of Kaifim Harkagis, on that Gemara of raising the mountain above them. He says, God's king, He tells him what to do. Doesn't need an acceptance. So why does God need an acceptance? So this, Pnei Yeshua says, a remarkable answer. He says, listen. He says, that's because without an acceptance, God would have no right to give someone hell. Okay? Because the fact is, as a king, right? Here's the rule.
What kind of giver of good wants someone to accept something just so they can give them hell?
So that's going to be the problem. It's going to be a further question. What he's saying is like this. He says, the acceptance is going to be that you have to basically say that as a legislator, you don't want to follow the law. Okay, so we can take you out. We or in terms of God as a creator, these are the rules for being created. These are rules for existence. You don't want to be existent. Then we can end your existence. But I can't have you. But I have no right to allow you to exist in pain. In other words, there's one thing for God to say, listen, I created these rules. This is the rules for existence. You don't want those rules? You don't want it, then you don't have to exist. But to say I created these rules for existence, and if you don't want them, I am going to give you pain, says that's totally contrary to the basic fundamental concept of God in justice, saying I created you, I have authority over you. So Pnei Yeshua says that was the whole point of the Kabbalah. He was saying that in terms of Torah, which necessitated a different relationship with consequences of a better idea if you follow the rules, and had to have consequences of a negative side. Okay, that was the purpose of the Kabbalah. God was no longer just saying my authority as king is telling you commanding you what to do. I want an authority beyond king. I want a contractual authority because I want to enter into a contract with you that says if you do this right, I'm going to benefit you. But in order to do this, there has to be some kind of negative consequence if you don't do it. So now this gets into further things like your question. Does it really have to be negative consequences? Why can't you? So the fact is the questions keep going on. And the truth is when you really get down to it, I personally have no idea what Olam Haba and Gehenim is. Okay, so the truth is I don't get into the actual details. Okay, and I have no idea. What I'm just saying is that what you're really talking about is the nature of God.
So why doesn't God need everybody individually to do that? Why don't we all have,
that choice?
We reach 13, we get this revelation, hey guys, this or this.
Good question. The fact is why the revelation only happened once. I have my own theory for it. The fact is that the nature of the revelation had to go through a historical modification, had to go through historical epochs, in the sense that the way we relate to Har Sinai is different than the way people at Har Sinai actually related to it. So my issue is much more of an issue. The issue at Har Sinai was an issue that dealt with miracles,
Right.
and how they understand. Can I understand the concept of Bechira with a nation that actually experienced Har Sinai?
Right.
Okay, I have no idea how they had any type of Bechira. The part of the reason it's great Bechira now.
Well, considering they were at level 49, I'm assuming godliness didn't really affect them as much as it would us.
The fact is, something you're getting into issues. What you're really getting into issues is how the nature of our relationship to revelation changes, and the fact is that has a lot to do with our own psychology, our own personality, and so forth. In other words, the issues I have in dealing with Torah and the questions of Torah and so forth are different than the questions that existed 1,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago and so forth. My issues are very different than the issues that the Dordea felt in the Sinai. The point is that one thing everyone has in common is the fact that they're all dealing with complexity. Everything was not always so clear. And the Dordea had its own complex issue. What was the Dordea's complex issue from my perspective? Is they had no idea how to deal with an omnipotent God who could do everything. I mean, the fact is if you think about this in terms of the Dordea's decision by the Meraglim, what are you talking about? We just saw what God did to Egypt.
Right.
And now you're afraid of going into Israel? What are you afraid of? God will do the fighting with you. So what exactly did the nation think?
Wasn't that about the whole staying in the desert? We'll study. We don't want to have to deal with material.
And that's because that's one argument.
Was it
that's
also
one
that
argument.
I have two questions. One, in regards to the statement you just had, isn't the idea that the Yetzirah was also stronger? No.
The terms the Yetzirah is also stronger. What does that mean?
They're more. What's the term? Not arrogant. Yeah, they're arrogant.
Well, then what exactly was that?
Abrasive.
What exactly was that? The fact is that we have to get into what that definition is or and Yetzer Tov are. But I would say this about the door in the desert. Door in the desert. When they had to do something, and in other words, what they felt was that they would have to conquer Israel.
Right.
Okay, not necessarily rely upon miracles from God to conquer it. They knew that God could beat up the Canaanites and whatever. The question is, could they do it? And that was their concern. The fact of the matter is it's a concern of how much involvement God has in their lives as they were now supposed to develop their own aspect of their lives. It's a matter of a balance we have all the time in terms of what do we do and what do we rely upon God to do and so forth. And the Dordea, which basically relied upon God to do everything, their challenge was, how do we do it? Now it's very interesting, if you look over there, Kalev's statement, when the Dordea basically said, we can't do it, I don't think they had any question whether God can do it. They can do it. Kalev's statement is very interesting. Kalev's first statement, what he says, does not say God can do it. Kalev says we can do it. And the Kalev's call was you have to believe in yourselves. The truth is that we're jumping around here. The truth is that what you really see is, I'm just pointing out some aspect. Every one of these things demands its own investigation, but it's just a matter of the complexity that comes out with thought and understand what's really going on here. God's statement to us, in terms of doing things, was not simple. It was complex, and it's complex in the sense that we're dealing in this real world. And part of that real world is cause and effect, and God's involvement in cause and effect, and going beyond cause and effect, and how much faith you have beyond cause and effect, and so forth and so forth. Anyway, so the point is that this all started with a simple question. Why did God create this world? Okay, if you're going to say God's whole essence is to benefit others, human beings, and He created the world to benefit human beings, so why not put human beings directly in a world that's totally beneficial, which is Olam Haba? Why the necessity to go through this state before Olam Haba. So that is, so we can earn Olam Haba.
Right.
So the point is that it's said that there's some benefit that we won't get the full concept of the benefit unless we earn it. Now, there's another question that could be asked. Okay? Because it says that a human being is embarrassed by taking something for nothing, so if you want to give a full benefit, he has to earn it. Now, there's another question that could be asked on that statement.
Oh, we have to earn it?
Well, because the full benefit can only be if you earn it.
So aren't we constantly challenged?
That in this world we're constantly challenged, and that's why we earn Olam Haba. But there's yeah, so that's good. Now there's one little problem with this answer. Who created the human being?
God.
God. And what are you talking about? If I sit there and say, according to this idea that a human being doesn't fully benefit something from what they're earning, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the psychology of the human being.
Right.
And who created that psychology?
God. Right.
Therefore, why didn't God just create the human being that he would just appreciate something for nothing, right? In other words, you're saying that because the ultimate benefit is to earn it on your own. Right. So why create human beings that they feel that the ultimate benefit is we make it that they feel the ultimate benefit is to get something for nothing and then just put them straight into Olam Haba. Right?
Right. But then he wouldn't have his playthings.
So let's try and okay. Anyone have anyone try another answer? More acceptable to classic Jewish thought?
You mean not calling God a giant child?
Any ideas?
By
the way, I just heard someone just saw that new Exodus movie.
Yeah.
Mm. Have you seen it?
No.
Did you see the interview?
No.
Have you seen Noah?
No.
I saw Noah. I thought it was garbage.
Okay. The truth is that okay. I'll take a little bit of a breather here on that. I saw a few minutes of Noah. And was so disgusted, but just walked out. The fact is, I was interested in seeing a few minutes of Noah because what I read about it was there were some Jewish people behind it, and the fundamentalist Christians were up in arms about it. Okay? and that supposedly the argument was the guy turns this the article I read said these people wait a second, let me excuse me. The fact is what I read was that fundamentalist Christians were really upset with Noah because the guys who were behind it, there was the Jewish people involved, and they were quoting Midrashim. So I became very interested in finding out what Midrashim they were quoting and why that would get the fundamentalists so upset. What I saw had nothing to do with that. Okay, it was totally.
Had like Midrashim.
Yeah, the Prince of Egypt had Midrashim. The fact is there's one movie that actually thanks the Jewish Medrash in its credits. Really? Anyone know? There's a famous movie.
The Ten Commandments.
10 Commandments. At the end of the 10 Commandments, in the credits, the Jewish Medrash. Okay. So suppose yes. So I didn't see Noah. The fact is,
apparently they were pissed at Noah because they were saying the liberals were pushing the vegetarian agenda when they were vegetarian.
Well, that was part of the issue. It was more than that in terms of the problems. But the fact is that there was another side that was interesting. The fact is I just heard with this movie is that God is portrayed by a kid.
Yeah.
In this movie.
Yeah.
In Exodus?
In this Exodus movie. So the truth is that we're not looking at people seeing God from a classical perspective. Anyways, the point is that's why when it comes down to it, I'm asking certain questions, and the truth is that even with the answer that says that the psychology of the human being is to appreciate something good when he earns it, so then why maintain that psychology of human beings? Why did God create a person with that psychology of human being? Anyone have an answer on that? Okay, so this becomes the second aspect here. The first thing you got to know is to ask questions. Therefore, the idea is for you to constantly, the first call is to ask questions. The second call, and this is something that's involved in, is then trying to figure out answers. And the great thinkers in Jewish thought all worked on answers.
Right.
And the answers were not, they didn't have to bring a pasuk that gave this answer. They worked it out. And that's all part, and that's why so many statements that we take as black and white are actually analysis by other statements. If people say, I don't want to hear what the rabbis want to do, then you might as well just, the rabbis are everything in Jewish thought. When you read a Shulchan Aruch, every thing of a Shulchan Aruch is a psak that is rendered on a halachic issue. Very few statements are presented that are just black and white, everyone agrees on it. It's usually a matter of disagreement. Anyways, the point is that we ask this from this opening question that basically says that God wanted to give good. So therefore, he basically says, man is created. This is where he's going to go, and I'm just going to finish this one paragraph tonight. We'll read through quickly now. This says is that God created us with this desire to help others. Okay, and that's what it means that we're created in the image of God. We're created with this desire to help others, because God is essentially Tov v'Meitiv. Shekol mashu bara v'yatzer haya ritzoni is baruch rak lachatev im hanivraim. God created everything only to benefit his creations. Okay? V'kein ritzoni is baruch she'nelach b'drachav, and one of those things is that human beings will walk in his way. Kamor v'alacha b'drachav. He wanted human beings to walk in his way. Therefore, he gave human beings this desire to help others, which was fundamental to the very being of God. We, who are the prime of his creation, always take steps to try and make everything we do, all our powers, both physical and spiritual, to benefit others. Kafi arkenu, according to our need. Okay? Now, that's going to be an interesting idea. Basically, your argument is going to be that is it true that people actually consider others? But what he's opening up here is with an interesting statement. If God created human beings, God created human beings to follow in his path. Okay? His path is, or to follow in his ways. To follow in his ways is to benefit others. Therefore, human beings want to benefit others in what they do. That's his opening statement here. Okay? As an argument. Okay, now, that idea of human beings wanting to benefit others, or basically this idea of God being, God creating human beings in his image, is also somewhat of an answer to the other question of why we want to earn the life. Because what is the ultimate definition of God? The ultimate definition of God is his will is him. In other words, he is totally a result of his own efforts. Right? He is not something that has benefited from others. He is totally a power of his own being. Therefore, the idea that we want to have our olam haba basically is what is the ultimate benefit of being, of ultimate good that we can be, is in emulating God. And that's really one idea of olam haba, is that we get closer in emulation of God. And that also brings us closer to him. But the point is that the aspect of emulation is the aspect that we are the result of our own efforts. Okay, so we're not created like a robot. We want to have our own will. And having our own will means making a decision about who we are. And that's ultimately what's supposed to happen in this world, is we are taking steps to create ourselves from whatever God gave us. And therefore, at that point in time, we are emulating him. And that's really what's being said by this idea of earning it, is creating ourselves. Okay, which is an aspect of emulating him, because he is a creation of his own being. Okay? Okay. We'll move on from here. Let's hear if there's any questions. Questions? Okay. And then we'll take one question on we have questions on camera.
Creating people in his own image to help other people. How do you explain sociopaths? Okay,
so that's going to be an image that we're going to have to deal with. That's going to be a question. The Shimon Shkop is throwing out an idea, which is the creation of God in his image means caring about others. That's his concept, and it's a concept that he's defending from an argument that we define God as a Tov v'Meitiv.
But now, the existence of sociopaths just
that's a legitimate question.
talks about
we have to let's see how it goes on. That's a legitimate question. I want to deal with that down the road. The fact is that there will be a legitimate question down the road, because any statement at this point in time is God is only presenting one aspect of a factor in creation. There may be other aspects.
Anyone else have any questions?